A 10-year-old boy accidentally fell from a building. When he woke up, he identified his father as the one who pushed him. His father thought his son was too fat and that it affected his appetite, so he kicked him down the stairs. The father even found his son lying on the ground without moving, so he checked his nose. After finding no surveillance around, he chose to leave the place. When confronted with his son's accusations, the father said that his son lied, but the police didn't believe him. Listening to the conversation in the interrogation room, Swang, a policewoman, realized something was wrong. The shoes on the man's feet were not his. They were the shoes of a restaurant. When he heard about his son's accident, he didn't even change his shoes. He even lost his shoes while running, which is why his socks were so dirty. When the police heard this, they said that the father must have some problems. To find out if the father was violent, the mother immediately assured Swang that her son was a good boy, but his sudden mania puzzled Swang. They checked all the surveillance cameras in the neighborhood from that day. The boy holding the dog was a strong suspect. Looking at his father's face when he left, he didn't look like he was running away. When asked, "My wife took 3 minutes to realize that the boy lived on the 3rd floor." Swang noticed his wife's strange behavior. Not only was she slow to react, but her buttons were also wrongly placed. Although there was no surveillance at the stairway, the boy admitted his mistake. At that time, his dog was barking at Fatty. He was afraid of dogs and fell down the stairs. The father was cleared of all suspicion, but it was strange why the son would accuse him. So the police found the person who ate with him at the restaurant that day. After secretly taking her mobile phone, they found a photo of the two of them on the phone. The wife, who didn't know, was still taking her vitamins as usual. She took her vitamins every day, but this time, when she opened them, she found a cockroach inside. She was so scared that she spilled the pills all over the floor, and the pills destroyed the family. At that moment, Swang came in. She took one look and became suspicious, so she went to the drugstore and bought vitamins. When she opened them, they were yellow in color. Just as she thought, the wife's pills were switched. The father just got out of the police station and told his wife to leave. He wanted to talk to his son. Swang came over just then. She sat down without a care in the world and even took out her mobile phone to record the boy. Swang knew that the cockroach was put there by the boy on purpose, and the son's next words completely ruined his father. Although his father was very nice to him, he always brought his pretty aunt with him. Their intimate behavior made the son guess what was going on, but he didn't realize that the pretty aunt had talked to his father. She switched her mother's vitamins to a nerve stimulant, so he could ask her for a divorce. When she was in a trance, he wanted to tell Mom but didn't know where to start, not to mention Mom's mental health was on and off. So his father, who had been out for less than half a day, was arrested again on suspicion of intentional injury. Although Swang had a brilliant mind, she never thought that her husband of 10 years was a 20-year suspect wanted by the police. Every morning before his wife woke up, he always practiced to smile in the mirror. He even opened a low-profile studio specializing in custom-made jewelry and crafts. But one day, an unexpected guest appeared and shattered his peaceful life. In fact, he just wanted to repair his broken necklace. He was introduced to the owner by Shi Chung, who was a very skilled craftsman. When the man got up, his expression froze. Obviously, the other party was also very frightened. Although the man said he was too busy today, he called out his name, Hansu, and even tried to confirm it. Knowing they grew up together in the countryside, seeing that he was recognized, Hansu stopped pretending. He asked him what he wanted. Although the man said he was just looking for Baek Soo-kan, Soo Jun's husband, and didn't mean to look for him, it was obvious he was scared to death of the man in front of him. Knowing that the other party knew his wife, Hansu instantly changed his attitude and invited him to have a cup of tea before leaving. You can imagine he wouldn't let go easily. At this point, the companion's heart was even more panicked. He's experienced Hansu's methods. One word to describe it is brutal. The girl deliberately put ketchup on her nose, then told her father that her nose was bleeding. The father pretended to be nervous and asked if she was okay. Seeing her father so nervous, the daughter was very satisfied. That day, the daughter's nose really did bleed at the kindergarten. Although the mother was distressed, she kept her wits about her. She explained that children are always bumping into each other. She told the girl to apologize to her daughter and make up, but the mother refused. She said her daughter wouldn't apologize. "Your daughter took my daughter's doll first," even though her daughter explained that she just hugged it. The wife told Swang to teach her a lesson. Swang was getting angry. Hansu arrived, bowed, and apologized. He asked his daughter to apologize to him too. The daughter apologized, even though she was upset. Obviously, the wife was not happy with her husband's behavior. To comfort his daughter, the father ordered her favorite egg tart. However, the daughter was really angry. She thought her father didn't love her anymore. She even thought her father was a soft touch in front of outsiders. But her father taught her the most important lesson in her life. Throwing punches is not winning. You can avoid a lot of things by not caring. For example, that girl has a habit of throwing things. Maybe one day she'll lose her doll, and then everyone will argue it's her fault for not putting her things away and blaming you. Unbeknownst to her, the father had just thrown the doll into the rubbish bin. No one knew he was a murderer in disguise for 20 years. No one knew he spent his childhood in the shadows, bullied by his classmates. Now, he has to learn to smile every day because he married a cop's wife. The child is now 6 years old, and the family lives happily ever after. The man's identity has never been revealed, but every time we go to mom and dad's house, the daughter always hides behind her father in fear. The mother immediately asked her daughter to say hello to ease the embarrassment. The daughter could only gesture love with fear and trepidation. But the expressions on their faces showed their indifference. Even the daughter could tell that her grandparents don't like her. It's only because it's her husband's birthday today that it's a rare occasion for them to come here. But the two of them looked like logs the whole time. Seeing how much they love each other, they were so angry. Sure enough, when the mother and daughter went to the washroom, this so-called mother began to show her true nature. She asked him if he was doing this to irritate them. The old man stopped his wife and told them not to fight amongst themselves, as at least they were on the same side now. But they don't know that there's a mysterious man in Hansu's basement. He was supposed to come here to fix his necklace, but they didn't expect him to be his companion. He didn't think he'd recognize him after 20 years. On the surface, he politely invited his companion for tea, but in his heart, he wanted to get rid of him. His companion sensed the danger, so he pretended to take a sip of tea and left. But Hansu stopped him. He asked if he was in a hurry to go to the police station. He knew he'd say no, so he asked him to write down an address and send it to him. Once he had repaired the necklace, he had to sit down and fill it out. But he didn't know that Hansu was already on the move. He pulled down the curtains and turned up the music. By the time he turned around, it was too late. When he got back, he was as good as new. The family was happy, but his wife had no idea that in the basement of the neighboring studio, there was a man locked up. The man was tied up in the studio next door. Luckily, he was still alive. But the next day, the daughter complained that her mother couldn't blow dry her hair as well as her father, so she asked her father to help her. When she found out from her daughter that mom was helping you clean the workshop, at the same time, her fellow prisoners were already struggling. Hansu, who had a ghost in his heart, didn't dare delay a moment. But at that moment, his wife was crouching in a corner. Hansu was even more panicked. His wife handed him a splinter and asked if he broke the cup. In fact, the cup was broken during the fight, but the husband explained that he broke it by accident and dragged his wife out to go shopping. The wife didn't notice anything unusual in the basement. Pity the man, who was still struggling inside. The wife, a police officer, never suspected anything wrong with her husband. She didn't realize that he was Hansu, the suspect the police had been looking for 20 years. He had changed his name to Beck Swan to avoid being recognized. He practiced smiling in the mirror every day. She had been living in peace for over 10 years, but then her best friend found out about her whereabouts. He was a reporter. If we let him go, we'll be in deep trouble. Although the reporter explained that he just came to repair his necklace and didn't mean to find out where she was, he swore he wouldn't report him. To check the truth, Hansu opened his partner's notes to see if there was anything about him. On the last page, he found a familiar name. He took the notebook and confronted his partner, knowing that he almost died at the hands of that man. Now he's trying to find out something through Nam Sun-ji, knowing that he won't talk. So Hansu poured out the water rather than give it to him. At this point, he could only tell the truth because there was a case a while ago. It was exactly the same way you killed someone 20 years ago. I wrote a story about Hansu, but 2 days ago, this man contacted me and said Hansu was going to kill him. He asked me to meet him tomorrow and give him your story. Soon after, the man got a call from a reporter. In fact, Hansu was watching him from above. He asked what the reporter wanted to report on Hansu. The man told her all about their 3 years together, including Hansu's personality quirks. He even twisted the facts, saying that when he found out Hansu was a fugitive, he disappeared. In reality, Hansu was looking for his lost wallet that day. The man, greedy for money, wanted to kill Hansu and take his money. Now, he was reporting that Hansu wanted to kill him. Hansu didn't want to get into trouble and reassured him that Hansu should be dead by now. The man didn't realize the point of living with a murderer on the run. Isn't it better to be dead? At night in the hotel, the man was thinking about it. He wanted to call the reporter to ask if Hansu was dead. Then, why did he keep getting calls from Hansu threatening him? The reporter couldn't get through at the moment, so he was about to leave a message. Suddenly, a man in a raincoat came in. He was leaving a message for the reporter, saying, "I told you Hansu would come to kill him. What should I do now?" He didn't have time to think about it, but rushed at him 10 times faster. The next day, the owner of the restaurant was found in a pool of blood. His wife, a detective, rushed to the scene. The same rope, the same method of death. This was the murderer's modus operandi in the serial murder case 20 years ago. Luckily, there was a surveillance camera in the store. From the camera, they could see that the murderer was wearing a raincoat. Swang then remembered that her husband also wore a raincoat last night, but she ruled it out in a flash. So, they started with the victim's phone records. The last person they contacted was reporter Kim. Unbeknownst to her, the reporter was locked up in the basement of her workshop. Before going to bed, the wife insisted that her husband put on a raincoat. The husband was so nervous that he didn't know what to do. The wife armed him with everything, even putting on a hat. In a moment of reflection, when he heard his wife say that a man had died this morning, the husband looked calm. He asked his wife if she suspected that he came back in the middle of the night to kill someone. Instantly amused, he asked what she was thinking. Last night, he came back in a raincoat, and even she almost did not recognize him. The victim had just seen a man come in through the door. Why did he recognize Hansu, who had been on the run for 20 years, not to mention the fact that he was wearing a mask? How did he recognize him? My husband was trying to tell me that maybe it wasn't Hansu, but his wife insisted it had to be Hansu. The main thing was that if she caught him, she'd get a promotion. But she didn't realize that her husband was Hansu. She didn't even know that she almost killed him. During the day, she went to the reporter's house to look for information. But before she sat down, there was a knock at the door. Through the cat's eye, it was her wife, a detective. He knew she'd come in, and he was ready for her. Sure enough, his wife found moldy takeout on the doorstep. Worried that something might happen to the reporter, she had the door pry open. She searched the house but didn't find the reporter. Strangely, the reporter's cell phone was turned off. The clothes on the floor made Swang curious. Why were the clothes crushed under the bench? There was only one possibility. Someone had come to the house. When she touched the computer, a warm sensation convinced her that there was someone else in the house. So, she searched every corner of the room. Unbeknownst to her, the man was watching from the balcony. He didn't look like he was going to last much longer. The wife was still sticking her head out to check. Suddenly, the husband slipped and almost fell off the balcony. He even made a little noise. The wife, who was about to leave, went toward the noise. The husband's heart was in his throat. Just as his wife was about to go forward, a coworker asked her to pick up the phone. God knows how hard it was for her husband to call her. She saw her husband holding the balcony with one hand and his cell phone in the other. He pretended to ask her if she knew reporter Kim. He told her that the reporter was there to see her. But his wife told him to tell the reporter to wait for her at the police station. He wanted to get away from his wife, but didn't realize that the boy downstairs was staring at him. Then he shouted, "There's a thief here." Swang was about to leave the house when she wanted to check it out. Suddenly, her husband told her, "I think I have a cold and a fever." The wife was very anxious. She took a shortcut back to the workshop. After entering the house, she went straight to the basement. She knew she had the reporter in there, but she didn't know that the reporter was also trying to save herself. As soon as Hansu entered, the reporter attacked. Soon, the two were fighting, but he was no match for Hansu. His wife rushed home and opened the door, but the door opened from the inside. Reporter Kim said that they were supposed to meet at the police station. Apparently, they had reached some kind of agreement that his wife was carefully cleaning Hansu's wounds. The reporter was so upset, he felt he was the one who got hurt. Soo-young was furious at her husband's injury and handcuffed the reporter without saying a word. She was arrested for assaulting Mr. B's Soo-sun. The reporter was desperate and asked Hansu for help. Her husband explained that it was just a misunderstanding. It was his fault for speaking out of turn and assuming she was after him. That's why the reporter got angry. To make matters worse, Hansu apologized to him. The reporter didn't realize how well Hansu was acting. When he got back, he immediately checked his so-called secret. The camera had been moved, which meant Hansu had really taken it. If that thing was exposed, his life would be over. Hansu thought his identity would never be revealed. He didn't realize that the net closing in on him was tightening. Early in the morning, reporter Kim eagerly found him. As soon as he walked in, he said there was a murder case. Hansu signaled that his children were at home, but the reporter couldn't resist showing him the news. Hansu didn't realize that the police had made such a stupid assumption that the restaurant owner's death was the result of a 20-year-old murder. Hansu, the murderer who's been on the run for 20 years, is responsible for the restaurant owner's death, the news reported. The reporter asked him to think about why someone would impersonate Hansu. He was afraid that his daughter would find out. He pushed the reporter out. She was a police officer, and she was interviewing the wife of the deceased. What did Hansu and your husband have against each other? The wife only knew that they used to deliver to a restaurant, but her husband had been receiving threatening phone calls from Hansu in the middle of the night and seemed afraid of him. To find out the truth, they went to the restaurant, but strangely, the specialty dishes were exactly the same as those her husband made for her. At that time, she tried to persuade him to become a chef, and Hansu pulled the reporter out. He asked what she wanted. His companion knew very well that he didn't kill the restaurant owner because the victim died at 3 o'clock in the morning, and Hansu was drinking with him in the basement. He even checked the clock when it chimed. But now, why did the police think he was the killer? Even the victim thought Hansu killed him before he died. Clearly, someone wanted to frame him for the police. I don't know what the purpose is, Hansu said, wondering why the reporter was so anxious about him. My partner said, I just want to work with you. I'll get you off the hook and give you an exclusive report. Although no one suspected Soo-young now, she didn't want Hansu to be framed. Hansu didn't understand who that person was. His wife had already met the owner of the restaurant. It was true that Hansu used to work there, and his relationship with the victim was okay, but he didn't have an ID. He was paid in cash. The owner was so ungrateful, he just disappeared without saying goodbye. The wife thought he was an unsympathetic guy. Once, when she fell in the restaurant, he instinctively laughed. When she asked why he was laughing, he just said it was a funny wrestling move. That's why she'd recognize him if he were dead. But she didn't know it was raining, and they were out delivering. They knew he was an unknown, so they went after him for money. They wanted to attack Hansu in the woods. Hansu, who was stabbed, tried to run away but was hit by an approaching car. The collision gave Hansu a new identity, Bi-sukon. The real Bi-sukon was secretly locked up by his father for 20 years because he was now a vegetable. No one knew how hateful this kind of vegetable could be. It could be described in 3 words. The crime is unforgivable. The man smashed the alarm clock on the wall just to save his life. Later, he wrapped tape around one end, then picked it up to see how strong it was. He waited for the other guy to show up. Suddenly, his cell phone rang. He nervously found a better angle and saw his daughter crying for her parents on the other end of the line. He reassured his daughter that her father was out of town. He told her to be good and listen to her grandmother, and that he'd be back soon. The daughter didn't know that her father was almost caught alive by her mom because of an old lady's report 5 years ago. The old lady had accidentally photographed Hansu, who'd been on the run for 20 years. She'd been watching him since he was a kid, so she couldn't be wrong. She received such an important tip. Soo-young didn't dare delay. At the same time, Hansu received a call from his partner. The police went to the old lady's house to get her photo. If it got out, Hansu would be dead in no time. To destroy the photos, they had to be one step ahead of the police. So, they took a shortcut to the old lady's house. They had a plan. A companion approached and stole the photos. Hansu hid in the room first, but as soon as reporter Kim entered the house, he realized the old lady was tied up. Before he could react, he was attacked from behind. Hansu, who was waiting outside, suddenly realized a dark shadow had passed by, and he instinctively chased after it. He quickly pinned the figure to a tree and ripped off the mask. Strangely, he didn't recognize the person, but he demanded to know where young Misu was. The man reminded Hansu that the police would be arriving soon and suggested they meet at the hotel in front. The police did arrive at the front door. It was Hansu's wife. When he heard the commotion, Hansu was ready to leave. While climbing the wall, his wife called out his name. Knowing he couldn't be caught by his wife, he chose to run away. However, his wife, a detective, wouldn't let him go. The husband ran ahead, and the wife chased after him. He led her to an old warehouse. The wife tried to find the switch with the help of a flashlight. Hansu immediately grabbed a hammer. When the wife pressed the switch, Hansu threw the hammer quickly and accurately, causing the lamp to explode in a flash. Then Hansu put a cloth over his wife's head. He wanted to leave, but when he saw the tool on top of his wife's head about to hit her, he instinctively stepped forward to protect her, but was struck by the tool instead. He quickly handcuffed his wife and got away. He then went to the agreed location, but at the same time, Soo-young was found and rescued by her colleagues. Unfortunately, the photo had been taken. The police initially thought Hansu would be the first to exploit the situation, but they discovered a new lead. A suspicious taxi had been seen at the victim's house for 10 days and hadn't shown up since the day of the incident. The police immediately thought of the cab driver who had visited the police station a few days ago and had left a cup behind. Soo-young reported that photos had been taken, and the police suspected a leak. They opened the cup and found a bug inside. This meant the driver was a strong suspect. However, what Soo-young didn't expect was that the police found a watch in the warehouse where she was held. The watch made Soo-young freeze for 5 seconds. She looked at the back of the watch in disbelief. It belonged to her husband, Bi-suk. The man woke up to find himself in a drained pool with someone staring at him. Originally, he thought he could save his life with just a small piece of glass, but he didn't expect to be on the other side of the appointment. The guy seemed to have a melon seed in his hand. Suddenly, he took advantage of the man's absence and knocked him out with ecstasy. Though Hansu stabbed him with a piece of glass he had prepared, the driver pulled him back before he could climb out. One could imagine how much the man hated Hansu after waiting for 20 years. The man saw an opportunity and turned on the pool's drain switch, not giving Hansu a chance to live. Hansu didn't know what had been done to him. The driver pointed to a photo on the wall and demanded to know where his wife, Misuk, was. She hadn't been seen since she got into Hansu's father's car 20 years ago. Because Hansu had given his father an alibi, his dad got away with it. But Hansu insisted he had nothing to do with Misuk's disappearance. The man pulled out a pendant, a customized couple's pendant given to him by his own sister. The man said it was the only one of its kind in the world, one for him and one for his wife. He had discovered it was stolen by the restaurant owner. The man found out Hansu was still alive and had not killed the restaurant owner by faking the way Hansu did. The police were looking for Hansu's portrait. Hansu remembered that at his father's funeral, his sister had given him the locket herself, saying she wanted him to keep it for protection. When he was taken away by the driver, he was seen by the hotel owner's wife. When she was sure it was her husband, she was no longer calm. They already knew the driver was the murderer and the method was extremely cruel, but the driver only wanted to know where his wife was. As Hansu was submerged in the water and unable to breathe, the police found the location based on the cab's signal. Soo-young rushed in but was attacked by the driver. Luckily, Soo-young was able to defend herself, and her colleagues took care of him. Soo-young rushed to save her husband, but he was already submerged in the water. Not knowing if he was still alive, she jumped in. The colleague was stabbed and then fell backward with a vengeance. Coincidentally, the back of the driver's head hit the machine. Soo-young watched her husband's immobility and was close to breaking down. Soon, Hansu was rushed to the hospital. After being in a coma for a while, Hansu suddenly woke up. Maybe afraid his identity would be exposed, he instinctively wanted to leave. He didn't even put on his shoes. He bumped into his wife, Soo-young, who had just arrived. Subconsciously, he took 2 steps back, but his wife ran straight to him and gave him a hug. Hansu's heart dropped, but luckily, his identity hadn't been exposed yet. But when Hansu's mom entered the house, she yelled at him, telling Soo-young's mom to go home first. Her mother-in-law's words carried a hint of something hidden. As a detective, Soo-young sensed something was wrong and felt the family was hiding something from her. Meanwhile, the driver had recovered, but he felt like he was demented. This was no accident. Hansu and his father were trying to figure out how to silence him. After all, Hansu's identity couldn't be exposed, or they would all be doomed. They had to get rid of the driver, but Soo-young had grown suspicious. In the middle of the night, she went to her husband's workshop with her tools, searching for the door to the basement. She had never been in the basement before. While Soo-young was making her way through the basement, Hansu's mother was making her son's bed. She suddenly noticed something under the bed and thought her son was hiding something. To her horror, she discovered numerous photos and a bloody dagger. Terrified, she threw the items away, unable to comprehend when her son had developed such habits. The sight of bloody fingernails left her devastated. She contemplated suicide with the dagger but was interrupted when she saw her son digging a hole in the yard. He was staring straight ahead at a motionless man lying there. An hour ago, her son had been driving normally. Unluckily, he answered a phone call and accidentally hit someone, causing him to panic and bring the body back. When his mother asked what he was doing, he pointed at the man on the ground and said it wasn't his fault that the man ran in front of his car and died. She inquired if he was going to bury him. Her son realized the man was still breathing but acted as if he hadn't seen it. He told his mother to go inside and avoid getting caught in the rain. His mother, horrified by her son's calmness, only had one thought: to stop him. The knife in her hand seemed inadequate, so she stabbed her son when he wasn't looking. She hoped to end his crimes, but to her shock, the father saved the son's life with his medical skills. Although he was a vegetable, they never gave up on him, unaware that their son's actions could ruin their family. Hansu woke up after a month, thanks to the director's treatment. He struggled to remember what had happened. A co-worker had tried to kill him to take his money. Hansu knew he didn't have an ID, so even if something happened, the police might not find out. But after being stabbed and fleeing, he was hit by an oncoming car. Although he didn't know where he was, he knew his identity couldn't be exposed. He wanted to leave with his injured leg, but realized the family was quite wealthy. He thought about getting some money to leave. At that moment, the dean entered, and they looked at each other. Hansu instinctively threw away his things and left. With his current condition, he couldn't escape, so the two sides negotiated. Hansu didn't understand why he was asked to live in the dean's son's place. He realized the other party was also selfishly thinking of himself. If the truth got out, he would lose his position, while Hansu was running away because of unknown circumstances. This arrangement was mutually beneficial. Soon, Hansu took on a new identity as Bisu's son, but he didn't expect the new fate that awaited him. Despite being a wanted murderer as Hansu, he found himself frequently pursued by a girl who clung to him. At first, he tried to stay away, but as spring and fall passed, their relationship grew stronger. He even got married and had children under the Bisu's son identity. Despite being wanted, he supported his wife's decision to join the police force. One day, while her husband was unconscious, Soo-young saw him as her brother. He told her to live a good life and not come near him again because he was no longer Hansu. Soo-young, a detective, couldn't believe her husband was the suspect the police had been searching for 20 years. She had never suspected him before and had never visited the basement where he worked. This time, she needed to investigate further. Hansu's father had become a national sensation after committing multiple murders. After killing the village chief, he escaped and remained missing. Soo-young smashed the lock on the basement door with a hammer and sprayed a prepared liquid on the floor. She was horrified to see a large amount of fluorescent agent on the floor. She didn't dare to imagine what her husband had done there. Suddenly, her gaze fell upon the sports car in the corner and remembered how her husband had been caring when their daughter was very young. After more than 10 years together, she couldn't believe that her husband was such a man. To avoid alerting the police, she decided to observe him secretly. She gave him a gift under the pretext of celebrating his discharge from the hospital. On the surface, it was a watch, but there was a secret inside. Her husband, unsuspecting, put it on his wrist. That night, Hansu became restless and quietly went out alone. Soo-young had become less attentive, and Hansu quickly met with his companion, reporter Kim. The more he thought about it, the more he realized something was wrong. Why did the driver claim his wife disappeared after getting into his father's car 20 years ago? Hansu's father was with him that day, so he couldn't have done it. This left only one possibility: his father had an accomplice. Hansu believed his sister must have seen this accomplice, so he needed her help to find her. Unbeknownst to him, the locket his sister gave him at his father's funeral actually belonged to the driver's wife, Misuk. Soo-young was curious when she realized her husband had gone to meet a reporter in the middle of the night. When he returned, she wanted to question him about his whereabouts, but he lied, saying he had just gone to the workshop. She chose not to expose him, but continued to observe. Strangely, Hansu stayed in the workshop all day and didn't go out. Soon, Hansu received a call from his partner, who said he had found his sister and was meeting her in the countryside. Soo-young got a call from Hansu, who claimed he had gone out to meet a client and wouldn't be back for dinner. Soo-young was suspicious, wondering why he needed to travel to the countryside. At the appointment place, his sister had been waiting for a long time. It had been 20 years since they last met. Hansu, only 14 years old at the time, had learned that his sister had killed the village chief. Although it was in self-defense, outsiders wouldn't believe them because their father was a serial killer. To protect his sister, Hansu took the blame for everything, hoping she could live in peace. Now he needed her help again. The siblings talked until evening, unaware that Soo-young had overheard everything from outside the door. She was deeply regretful. Meanwhile, a girl was left at her grandmother's pharmacy because her parents were busy. The grandmother, however, did not want the child there. She grabbed the granddaughter's homework, saw it was third-grade math, and scolded her for studying too far ahead. The grandmother then tore up the book, and the frightened granddaughter cried. The grandmother insisted she was doing it for the child's own good, but in reality, the girl was not her granddaughter. Her son, now a vegetable, had always been intelligent with medals and certificates, but his personality twisted over time. The grandmother had discovered his violent tendencies and even caught him in the act of killing. She tried to end his crimes by stabbing him, but her husband's medical skills saved him. The grandmother's first thought was to prevent the girl from following in her son's footsteps. Seeing the child frightened by her, she decided to take her home and make her a special tart. She wanted the girl to eat quickly, so she could be sent away later. When Grandpa came home, the wife was visibly nervous. She questioned her husband about his lack of vigilance, but he accused her of bringing a strange child into the house. In their conversation, they completely ignored their granddaughter in the living room. The girl asked the nanny where the bathroom was, but the nanny, who was deaf, did not respond and smiled as she passed by. Unaware of the nanny's deafness, the girl wanted to find the bathroom herself. When Grandpa left the house, he found his granddaughter standing outside the door, unmoving. She said she needed to go to the bathroom, and he yelled at her. A 6-year-old child can walk on 2 legs. If you don't expose your son, send her away. But the next day, when her husband was not at home, the mother seemed to have made up her mind. She reached out and tried to pull out her son's oxygen mask. It's my own child, but what's the point of living with such a demon? She thought. The heart rate monitor began to beep faster, and watching her son breathe heavily, she stood by, watching. The father rushed home immediately after receiving the nanny's message. But this time, the wife stopped him from trying to save their son, who was still half-breathing. The father rushed forward but froze in place when he saw that his vegetative son had woken up. Now, the wife's hands were trembling as she held the tray. She had a bad feeling about this. Listening to her son's weak voice, he told his mother not to blame herself, but the mother continued to apologize. Her son's condition was critical. He asked how the person he hit was doing. The couple's hearts sank as they realized his identity had been replaced by this person, who was now married with a child. Hansu, meanwhile, was suffering because he was married to a detective. Soo-young was determined to catch him, and he was anxious about her. To prove he wasn't an accomplice, Hansu took off his ring and made a risky decision. However, he didn't know that his wife had discovered his true identity. A 50-year-old woman, a deaf-mute nanny, had been found dead in the wilderness. Strangely, the murderer's fingerprints weren't in the treasury. Soo-young's first thought was her husband. When she got back, she took his fingerprints from his makeup and compared them to those found at the crime scene. The match was exact. Although she couldn't believe it, the truth was undeniable. She had to bring her husband to justice. The nanny had been taking care of a vegetative person in a big house, and she could never have imagined that this person would kill her. It was suspected that this vegetable, who was miraculously waking up despite being mute and deaf, had a connection to the young master. The young master felt there was something unusual about the nanny and even asked his mother how much she knew about her. The mother assured him not to worry, claiming that the nanny only had a duty of care and didn't know anything. Nevertheless, the young master decided it was best to fire her early. Pretending to talk to the nanny, the young master dragged her down and asked if she really didn't know how to read lips. Terrified, the nanny quickly wrote on a piece of paper that she didn't know how to read lips. The young master suspected there was more to her than met the eye. When the nanny passed by the study, she overheard the father and son talking. She was so scared that she retreated immediately, but this did not escape the young master's attention. He warned his father to be careful about the walls of the house. Later that afternoon, the nanny, upset, submitted her resignation. She not only requested her pension but also demanded extra payment for confidentiality. "Please pay me in one lump sum next week," she insisted. The madam didn't understand the confidentiality fee, but was alarmed by the nanny's threat. The nanny claimed she knew everything about the family, and it was all deadly. The madam, desperate to keep the nanny, offered to double her salary, but the nanny was determined to leave. The madam tried to play the emotional card, reminding the nanny of her help in escaping from her husband's clutches. However, when the nanny accidentally knocked over a vase, cutting her forehead, the commotion brought the young master into the room with a wheelchair. He asked the nanny what she did to his mother. The nanny gesticulated angrily, threatening to turn them in if they didn't pay her. The young master stood up from the wheelchair. The madam, frightened by her son's tactics, knew the nanny was no match for him. When the father discovered the situation, he wanted to help his son dispose of the body. But then, the fake son and daughter-in-law arrived. Anyone who couldn't pretend would be nervous. Luckily, they had a plan. While they were chatting, the power suddenly went out. The wife used the excuse of getting candles to collect Hansu's fingerprints, knowing he would handle them. The wife sensed something was wrong but couldn't put her finger on it until she compared the killer's fingerprints with her husband's. Not noticing anything unusual, she confronted her husband and demanded he turn himself into the police. He confessed that he was Hansu and admitted to killing the nanny. Hansu wouldn't deny his identity, but he refused to let himself be accused of murder. In a desperate bid to buy time, he grabbed a knife and held his wife hostage. By the time the police arrived, the scene was empty. Hansu had only created a false impression under the surveillance cameras, making it seem like his wife had nothing to do with the situation. He ordered his wife to unplug the cable, and with a sigh of relief, he tried to calm her down. The wife was furious. "How dare you put a knife to my neck?" she demanded. Hansu then revealed the truth. The knife didn't have a blade, so it wouldn't hurt her at all. His intention was to find the real killer. He explained that if he was caught, the police would never find the real murderer, especially with Nook, who had been missing for 20 years, reappearing. He needed to catch the real killer before returning. Just as Hansu was about to leave, his wife managed to catch him and handcuffed them together. Unbeknownst to her, Hansu had lured her to a hotel and handcuffed her to a corner of the room, intending to make it appear as if she was his hostage. His goal was to let the police believe he was only trying to catch the real murderer on his own. Coincidentally, when Hansu's sister arrived home, she noticed someone sneaking around outside. In her attempt to catch the intruder, she got entangled in a struggle. Her clothes were torn, and she nearly lost her life due to the commotion. Soo-young was found and rescued by the hotel staff, but she informed her superiors that Hansu was the one they were searching for. Despite being a victim herself, Soo-young didn't blame her husband. At the police station, Soo-young saw Hansu's sister and instinctively took off her clothes to give to her. She asked what had happened and learned that the police had caught an escapee who was just a paparazzo looking for a scoop. Despite her busy schedule and growing illness, Soo-young wanted to stay and ensure her daughter's safety. Her daughter was taken to the police station, and Soo-young promised her that she would take her home once her work was done. When Soo-young and her daughter arrived home, they found the house in disarray. A bad feeling overcame Soo-young as she thought they had merely been robbed. Suddenly, she heard a noise outside. The girl thought it might be her father returning, but Soo-young realized the lights in the living room were off. A figure sat on the sofa, sending a chill down her spine. She quickly closed the door and instructed her daughter to lock it behind her. Soo-young then put on her badge, recognizing that the figure was someone who had given her the locket at her father's funeral, confirming he was the accomplice the police were searching for. As the man identified himself and pulled out a knife, Soo-young fell to the ground. He took her badge, leaving her at the mercy of his whims. Meanwhile, Hansu found the only witness, Mook. He planned to confront him and clear his name. As Hansu prepared for a sneak attack, he was surprised by Mook's quick reflexes. However, Hansu's readiness gave him the upper hand. He managed to tie Mook to a bench, but didn't anticipate the young master's intervention. The young master revealed a blood-stained ID card, and Hansu's expression changed dramatically. He called his wife's cell phone, turned it off, and contacted the police to confirm the information. Hansu was devastated to discover that the police were trying to save Soo-young's life, not realizing that Hansu had become the real murderer. In a fit of rage and revenge, he was about to use the knife on himself, but Soo-young stopped him. She had somehow found her way back. They ended up in a poignant embrace, their shared history and pain converging in that moment.